Well, welcome back to Sheep Stuff You Should Know with Ryan Mahoney coming to you here from the Amy Livestock headquarters in Rio Vista, California.
And Dan Macon coming from my wife's vet office here in Auburn, California. Nice and hot here in Auburn again. How's things down there?
Good, a little breezy. The winds picked up and it was supposed to get to 105, but the breeze picked up better than the weather forecasters knew, and so we haven't gotten over 100. So it's been nice down here.
It's nice break. We moved sheep real early this morning, and it was good to be doing it early because it was already warm here in the foothills.
So what stage are your lambs in right now? Have you weaned yet, or are you getting close to weaning?
Yeah, we weaned 2 weeks ago. We shipped some lambs. Our market is more on the kind of the ethnic side of things, so we shipped some lambs to Superior and picked out replacements and picked out a handful that we're going to finish ourselves. And so, yeah, we're kind of in full summer mode now. It's good.
Are you happy with the lamb crop, the weaning percentages, everything all good, or what?
Very happy with weaning percentage. I'm a little disappointed in our weights this year, and I need to sit down and kind of think about why that is. We're a little lighter than last year, but every year is a little different too.
You have more rain than normal up there in the spring?
We had late rain.
Yeah.
Which could have been it. We had early maturing feed and then late rain. So I think that probably is a big part of it.
Yeah, that late rain, and you get poor feed quality. You get more of it, but you get poor. The nutrition isn't as strong.
Yep.
Those dry years can produce some of the biggest lambs.
Well, and I think part of what happened for us is that it was such an unusual year that a lot of our feed matured early, and so the nutritional quality dropped in May, where we'd still be pretty strong on some of our rangeland feed.
Yeah.
So every year's different.
Oh, absolutely.
So.
What about you coal right now too? You coal when you wean?
Yeah, so we picked out, we kind of call twice a year. We picked out the spring calls, and we'll get them shipped here in about a week, and then we'll go through them again before we start flushing and turn the bucks in the fall, and just check mouths and check bags and that sort of thing. So
good deal.
Yeah. So it kind of settled in now. Now we're in irrigation and fence building mode for the rest of the summer, kind of. How are things there? What's going on there?
Oh, good. We're in summer mode. We got the irrigated pastures cranking and moving, and we have all of our lambs are all weaned. All our cattle are weaned and sold, and got a motorcycle brigade running by us right now. But yeah, we're just moving along. Everything's good. I just got back from Oregon. I took my son with me, and we did a little sheep tour road trip up there to go see some guys that we buy lambs from, and then go look at some ewes that we're looking at maybe buying, and see some range and visit some friends, and just kind of do a little sheep road trip adventure.
Well, and that kind of brings me to my first question for you today. That's a great segue. We asked your granddad this last week, but where's the best sheep country you've visited in your travels in the Western U.S.?
Oh, that's a tough one, because every area is a little different and is kind of special for its own reasons. I'm partial to the Montezuma Hills because that's where I'm from, and it's just got a great year-round climate. The negatives here are kind of probably foot rot or real fine wool type sheep. Can struggle on the wet years, but for the most of the time, it's really, really good sheep country. It makes good lambs, and the ewes hold together well, and they commingle with the cattle well. And I really like the hills here. But when you go around the country, there's something to be said about those big mountain ranges in the summertime when they get those spring rains and summer rains, and you get the feed and those big bands of sheep that are really just in that high desert natural environment to them that you can just see them shining and doing real well.
Yeah.
And that's pretty special. None of the ranges are different. that Idaho country that my grandpa spoke of is
Yeah.
pretty special. There's such a drastic change in elevations, and but really good range is made by good water, good clean fresh water,
Yeah.
and so those better ranges tend to have better waters. I mean, you can get into some little pockets in Nevada that just have some phenomenal water. And you go through Nevada and you don't think of water very often, but when you can get a range with some good water, those lambs will just explode and do real well. Eastern Oregon is where we were at, and once again, it's real special, especially when you get up north.
Yeah.
They're just, yeah, it's really hard to pick on one. Pick one.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
it depends on the time of year too, because I love the summer ranges up in the mountains, but gosh, I sure as heck don't like the snowed in winters.
Yep.
So you got to have good winter range, and
Yep.
yeah, it's an art putting all that together. So
Yeah, very definitely.
yeah,
We're kind of headed that direction here the end of the week to go look at colleges with our daughter, and we'll actually get into northern Idaho and western Montana a little bit. And
yeah.
I always like seeing that country too.
One area that I think is a lot of times not or overlooked a little bit, but is really some phenomenal sheep country is the Willamette Valley in
Oh
Oregon,
yeah,
and then down to Roseburg, Oregon, and you get in those hills in Roseburg, and of course you can't run the fine wools down there because of the moisture. But man, the quality of the forage and the ability to raise, like, there's some of the best Texels and Dorsets and crossbreds. They'll run a lot of crossbred ewes or Suffolk ewes down there, and then cross them over with the Texel and those lambs can just be gorgeous little, fat little buggers coming off at 120 pounds. They don't always get a good shake, because when you take them out of that environment and move them into a real dry climate, you can have some problems with pneumonia. So a lot of your traditional buyers don't like going in there and buying those lambs because of that risk. But man, you look at those lambs in their natural element, and that's some of the prettiest stuff you ever see. Just beautiful sheep and beautiful lambs, and just shining like shining like heck. It's pretty cool.
that's really pretty country too. Really pretty country.
Especially where they can manage that forest and forage real well, where they can,
Yeah.
they go through and they'll thin the trees down, and they, can fertilize some of those hills, and it's pretty amazing.
It's a whole different production system, which
Yeah.
to me is just fascinating about sheep. There's so much diversity in the ways that we can raise sheep all over the world.
Yeah.
So you've done some international travel too, right?
Yes, I have. I was able to go with the American Lamb Board, the Tri-Lamb group, and we were able to go on a tour to New Zealand and Australia and tour their production systems back there. I was able to go through that, go to Lamex in Australia, which was just it was a very eye-opening experience.
What is Lamex?
Lamex is a lamb exposition. It's held by Australia. Their sheep associations put it on. It's a every 2-year deal. This year is canceled because of COVID, but it's usually every even numbered year. I went I guess it was like 4 years ago now, for something like that. And then I was able to send Jeff Clark, that worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
He was able to go 2 years ago, and then we had John Kidwell, the other guy that works for me. He's scheduled to go this year, but it got canceled, so he's going to go next time it comes around. But it's basically just like a lot of these trade organization events, where it's an information sharing area. They have a lot of presenters on the different research that's being done over there.
Mm-hmm.
There is a little bit of politics, but I'd say it's very kind of research centric.
Yeah.
You have a big trade show that everybody's showing off their newest and finest things. That's how I encountered Sapien Technologies, was through Lamex, which we use to manage our data. And then just, to go to that and have such a concentration of sheep producers from, they are from Australia, but a majority, but there are some international presence there, and you really learn a lot about what we in America are doing well, and how some of the things that we perceive are the negative things about our industry aren't necessarily negative. You know, and
Give me
so
an example. Give me an example.
I'd say like lamb weights is a good example of that. So one of the things they talked about there is in the international trade, every kind of country or region, they have their personality, and as having their personality, they have their demand for meat. So like Canada likes shoulders, and China likes kind of bellies and kind of some of those offcuts. Well, America, the United States of America, we are the largest consumers of loins and racks. So we eat center meats. Well, what is the American lamb known for? Giant loins.
Yeah.
Well, that's developed because the market that we live in has demanded that. So we've expanded the loins. Australia, New Zealand, they're selling into more of a world market. So they haven't focused on the loin. They focused on all these other products as well. And so that's one thing that I kind of opened my eyes a bit, because I've always, you always hear about overweight lambs. Lambs are too big. They're not finished right and all of these things. Well, our customer in the United States has demanded large loins for generations.
Yeah.
And so, of course, we've developed that. So rather than, look at that as a negative, I think it actually is a positive. Loins are a positive in this market. Now, with COVID-19 and the lack of the restaurant trade and all those things, loins aren't really selling really well. So a lot of people that own packing houses or meat companies are probably pretty disappointed in their loins right now. But traditionally, the U.S. likes loins, and that's one of the problems with the imports is when all of these other markets are so good,
right?
They're able to sell their loins at a lower price point than we sell our loins for, because we don't have as developed of a market. So like legs are consumed in the UK. They love leg. They eat a lot of leg there. Like I said, Canada, shoulders. And so if you can sell your legs into UK and your shoulder into Canada and your loins into the US and your other meats into China, you're able to really get full value for that whole lamb. Whereas in the US, because our numbers are so small, it's hard to develop those export markets. And so we're not able to utilize that as well. So we need to demand more for the products we can sell, like the loins. So that's one of the reasons why you have such a price spread, and why imports get blamed for a lot of the negativity in the market. They'll get the blame for it. It's not necessarily their fault. And I don't ever like blaming people. I always like trying to figure out the why and making changes to solve the why. But
and part of making changes to solve the why is understanding how complex the whole system is, right? And
yeah.
Sometimes you got to travel to understand that. It's really easy to get in your own tunnel vision.
Yeah, and you learn so much about your own ranch by seeing other people's. That's one thing my grandpa always taught me, and you learn every mile. So the more you can travel, the more you go out and see, the more you learn. And you don't want to make a career out of just traveling, because then you'll have no time at home. But you gotta find a balance, and you gotta be open and travel around. So
yeah, absolutely. So talking about travel, it made me also think about transportation, and that's another area where the scale that you operate at and the scale that I operate at are very different, but it's a big part of both of our businesses. And I was wondering if you could kind of walk through your process for, let's say you buy several loads of lambs. What's your process for getting them transported, and what are the things you have to think about to get trucks and receive those lambs and all of that? How does that work?
yeah, so there's a lot of logistics that go into buying lambs. And it's the same for buying ewes and same for buying purebred animals, and everyone kind of poses its own challenge. And so I have no problem buying 10 loads of lambs and arranging trucks and getting them home and figuring out where they're going. But if I buy 4 rams out of a ranch in Montana, I absolutely dread figuring out those logistics. Whereas other guys, that are tied into that, they know different gooseneck drivers and they know how to get a small bunch moved across the state. It's really easy for them. So
yeah,
it definitely depends on what you're doing. But we in the fall we'll go out to the mountain states and we'll buy some lambs out of there. And there's a lot of factors that go into the trade itself and costs. Number one is always going to be kind of your weighing condition and slash your pay weight, determining your pay weight. There's a lot of ways to do that. What you want to be doing, and the theory behind pay weights, is you want to buy the meat, sellable meat. So if you take your animals and you fill them up on water and their bellies are full, you can sell an extra 4 or 5 pounds of meat or of lamb, but it's really all water. And by the time they transport from one location to another, that's all going to be peed out, and you end up basically getting money for not for your product. And on the flip side of that, if you starve them out and they're empty completely, and by the time they get to where they're going to go, there's a health concern, and those lambs are hurt. And so you got to have a fair weighing condition, which is accounting for that, just that natural belly shrink, or the basically the pee that gets peed out on the road. And you want to have some shrink, but you don't want to have excessive shrink. And you can have, I'll use a cattle example. So when we were hauling cattle from Dixon, California to Oklahoma to the feedlots, we would have anywhere from a 6% shrink in the body weight. So they would lose 6% of their body weight to 12%.
Okay.
And so that's a huge amount on a, say, 1,000-pound, for easy math, 1,000-pound animal. They'll lose 60 pounds or 120 pounds by the time they get to that feedlot.
Amount of weight.
And there's a lot of factors that go into it. And like, just to start, the first ones are how full are they and all that. So when you want a fair weighing condition, what you're trying to do is establish a fair weight. So that way the buyer is buying the appropriate amount of meat, but then also leaving enough in the stomach. So that way you're not starving out and there's no health issues. You want to take care of the animal, because that's number one. And number two, you don't want to be buying air or water or something that you can't sell.
Yeah.
Because that all plays into your bottom line. So the other factors that happen that affect the shrink are actually your drivers and the way you load the trucks.
Okay.
So one of the biggest differences in that shrink on those cattle were the trucks that we were using, the drivers and the dispatch that ran them. So we switched to this other company. We were dispatching through one company. We switched to the other company, and we tightened up our 6 to 12% down to 6 to 8%. And it was 100% because the drivers that we switched to didn't brake as hard, didn't take off as hard. They stopped at the appropriate times. They checked the animals. When they stopped for lunch or gas, they made sure the trailer was in the shade rather than in the sun. All those little things add up to a better driver. And then the way they paneled them, the way they spread them out, the way they calculated floor space per animal, all those things go into that shrink. You pack your livestock in too hard, you run them hard, you stress them hard, they're going to be in worse condition. And the smoother you transition that, the more comfortable the ride, the less shrink you're going to have on that. So it is really important to pay attention to who's hauling your livestock and how they handle them and how they work with them. And then, so then determining pay weight, you have a lot of different ways. Sometimes they'll do an overnight stand where you put the sheep in the night before, you pen them up, and you let them sit overnight. That shrinks them out where they pee out a good percentage, or they get rid of a good percentage of that water weight. Yeah. But then they still go on the truck where they have a decent amount in their belly and they don't shrink very much. And so on that, you would basically weigh, you do the overnight stand, you'd weigh them immediately and take no shrink percentage off of the pay weight.
Okay.
The other way to do it is to take a percentage off. So they bring the lambs in the morning and they're full as ticks, and you load them, you run them across the scale, load them on the truck, and you take, say, 4% off of the weight. So you take the total gross weight, you subtract 4% off to account for that shrink loss. And that is another way to create a fair weighing condition. That 4% is just a number. There's a lot of different numbers that are used.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there is the way to do where they'll do you can do a no overnight stand, but then you load the trucks and then you drive the trucks for, say, 20 miles and then weigh the trucks on a scale. That would be a no shrink situation because the time that you started working in, because remember, stress gets that out. So, or working them gets that out. So if you brought them in and you started working them and you sorted them and you ran them across the scale and loaded them on the truck, by the time they got to that scale, 30 minutes to an hour later, they would have shrunk that 2 to 3%
Yeah.
that you would have acquired by holding them overnight. And so that would be a no deduction off the pay weight because of the distance to the truck. And you can do any variation in between, but though determining a pay weight's pretty important when you're working your logistics. And then I guess back to the truck drivers, knowing who you're dispatching and dispatching through trusted people. And that doesn't mean that every truck that I hire is the best. And we've had issues, but it's working through those people, building those relationships, understanding who they are, and letting them understand what you want as an operator, as far as how you want your livestock handled.
Does the pay weight determination method have any bearing on how you receive lambs when they're coming to you? So if they were held overnight, do you receive those lambs differently than lambs that were brought in and loaded and with the shrink calculated off of that weight?
No.
Okay.
We handle them all the same in our yard. We receive them in, they settle down, we get them immediately on water, and then we'll get them on feed usually within 12 hours of receiving. So we had one situation one time, and this is why it's really important as a producer when you're selling to be honest with what's going on. We didn't buy these. We received them on a custom feed agreement, and the lambs were pulled off of feed and water because they thought they were going to ship on a Monday, and then they moved them. They loaded them on a truck on the Monday and moved them to another corral or location, and they dropped them off and they sat them there for a Tuesday. And we didn't end up seeing those lambs till Wednesday or Thursday. They were basically 2 to 3 days off of water, and so they were completely dehydrated. And this is an example of what not to do. This is one of those things that I hope everybody recognizes, that we're not supporting this, but things happen in life, and you have to learn from these mistakes to go forward. But anyway, so they were basically off of feed and water for 3 days. And when we received them like we normally do. We put them right on water. And of course, if you have something dehydrated, that's the first thing you would do is go put them on water. But we put them on water, then we brought them to the corrals and we started medicating them. And after with the normal processing, and we let the first group out, and all of a sudden those lambs, they just started shaking and hemorrhaging and died.
Oh, wow.
And what it was salt poisoning, which is basically they hit the water way too hard because they were so dehydrated that it hemorrhaged their brain, where they had the blood shooting their head. And so we stopped everything and immediately released them all out to pasture. And then by doing that, because when you give them, what you need to do in that situation, and if we would have known that they were off of water for so long, we would have done this. You need to, if you have a dehydrated animal, you need to release it onto green grass is the best thing, because they will get the moisture from the grass for those first little bit of time, and then you can expose them to water. But if you expose them to straight water, that's what caused the problem.
That'll rehydrate them more slowly.
Yeah, exactly. And so then they won't shock their system, which is what happened. And that was one of the worst things I ever seen in my life. And I mean, of course, once that happened, we called the person that bought them. They called the producer, and the producer was, oh gosh, darn it. Yeah, we did keep them off of what? So we didn't even know, and the guy who bought them didn't even know until after we had the problem. And so that's why it's so important when you're selling lambs, you're honest with the situation. You don't say I didn't give them no water, but you actually gave them 10,000 gallons. And you also don't not give them water and then tell them, oh yeah, we just kept them, they had plenty of water for the last 2 days. You got to be honest. So that way on the receiving end, they're taken care of all the way through.
Yep.
So it's hopefully that's a learning thing and someone can learn from that. But
oh yeah, absolutely. Wow. So just to put this next question in context a little bit, we walked our ewes up the road maybe half a mile today where we're summer grazing. And our summer, we've got a place that's maybe 6 miles from our irrigated pasture where we summer the dry ewes and then where we lamb out. And I've always kind of halfway toyed with the idea of does it make more sense for us to walk those sheep that 6 miles, maybe over the space of 2 days, than to put them in the gooseneck and haul them? So how do you determine, you've got a lot more sheep, but how do you determine when you can walk sheep versus when you got to put them on a truck and move them from one place to another? What goes into that consideration for you?
Yeah, I think the first thing I look at is the ease of the path. So if you can walk them and the roads are fenced real well, and you can just walk them down the road with a spotter in the front and spotters in the back, then we always prefer to walk them if we can.
Yeah.
And so that's the first one. But then if we're in the Dixon Ridge feeding alfalfa fields, and there's a whole bunch of farm fields in between, and it's a little muddy, and people planted stuff, and you're going to struggle to keep them all on the road and keep them from maybe trailing into a field or something a little bit, then we'll maybe consider trucking them. So really the ease of transport. Sheep walk, oh gosh, what's the miles per hour? Is it like 1 to 2 miles per hour, I think?
Something like that.
I think it's like 1.5. Anyway, so you figure out how long you are. You don't want to walk them for more than like 4 hours at a time. I would say is pretty maxed. And you don't, when you're walking them, but you're not pushing them.
Right.
So you don't want them run. If they're running, you actually put a person in front of the band to hold them, to slow them down, to make them walk at a comfortable pace. So you're not running them, because if you run them, you can only go maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Then you got to find a home. But if you can walk them nice and gently, and they can pick at some feet on the shoulders of the road, and you just kind of go nice and gently, you can walk them, 4 hours or so pretty easily. So it really depends on that side of it.
One of the things that I learned when we were working with targeted grazing contractors in Lincoln, we're pushing some of those dry ewes to really take the feed down. So we may stay 8 hours longer than you would stay otherwise, for the terms of the contract. And you open that fence up when those sheep have been there maybe a little longer than they would have been otherwise by their own choice. And they do move pretty quick for about the first 5 or 10 minutes. And it does take somebody out in front, kind of slowing them down. And then they line out and walk just fine. But that first 10 minutes can be a little chaotic sometimes.
Yeah. And you always need to have a trailer or something with you, so that way if a ewe gets tired, you can pick it up, put it in the trailer, and carry it the rest of the way.
Yep. Absolutely.
So, and then of course there's the cost. It costs money to hire trucks and that stuff, but it also costs money to have all those people on the road walking. And so,
you got to look at both. What's it cost per loaded mile on a truck typically? What do you expect to pay?
Oh, on a truck, it's $4.25 a mile.
Okay.
Yeah, $4.25 to $4.75. It's kind of been floating in there for a few years.
Okay. And is that I assume that varies with fuel costs and
everything.
Yeah.
And volume. I mean, if you're in deadhead miles and all those things, so our truck dispatch gets to drive 10 minutes from their house to load our loads and then haul them somewhere. Whereas if you got to get a truck in, if they live in Dixon and you got to get a truck in Elko, Nevada and haul it to the Mojave Desert, and then he's got a deadhead, so he has to deadhead to the fire truck, deadhead to Elko, and then deadhead home. That's like 800-900 extra miles that he has to recoup.
Yeah, right. So returning to our own travels, this probably never happens to you, but sometimes I actually do some non-sheep related trips. But I always get busted by my wife because I always end up looking at sheep somewhere. Does that ever happen to you?
Yeah, a little bit. We did try to go vacation in New Zealand one time, and I told her no sheep, so we stayed in Auckland and walked around downtown. But we did get to sneak out and go to one of my buddies' places and went to their ranch, so we did see a few sheep. But yeah, we try to make vacation, but I don't know. It always tends to involve sheep sometime. Last year we took a road trip up to Oregon, and we brought the whole family. It was after a swim meet. We loaded the van up with all our swim gear and all our camping gear and everything. And then we went to the swim meet, left the house at like 4 a.m, went to the swim meet, swam all morning. And then right after that, just drove right up I-5 to Oregon. It was my wife hated me for the first like 12, 13 hours of that trip. And by the end, she loved it. So it worked out good. But we had to get her to that first hotel and pool before.
That's right. That's right.
She was happy.
That's right.
So.
One of our trips in this, or stops in this trip coming up, we're going to go visit University of Idaho with Emma, our youngest daughter. But I have a friend that's on the range science faculty up there, and she found out we were coming and wants me to come out and see her research on virtual fences. And we're going to some rangeland research project that she's doing with sheep and targeted grazing. So it'll be vacation because it won't be my projects, but it'll be kind of fun to see some of that stuff too. You need to go?
No, I'm good. I had the fire truck drove by, and then my foreman called me for the hills, and so I was a little nervous, but it sounded like it's all right. So,
well, one more quick question, and then I'll let you go. So, if you could go anywhere in the world to see sheep production, someplace you haven't been yet, where would it be?
Oh gosh, sheep production. Just for sheep production?
Someplace you want to see that might happen to have sheep.
Yeah, because there's a couple of places I'd like to go that may have sheep, like Ireland or somewhere like that. But but I'd want to go there for other reasons too. But the UK sheep production is pretty fascinating to me. The Irish and the British, because they have a lot of sheep over there, and it's kind of a similar situation where they're a highly affluent society, but still and pretty concentrated, small land mass, but still producing a lot of sheep. And so it's kind of an interesting model to see. It would be fun to see. I've been there, but never for sheep before. It was during my college days. But then the opportunity to go to Peru would be pretty spectacular to see some of the sheep herders in the high mountains up there in Peru. Just love to get up there and see that. They shear their sheep with the hand trimmer still.
Oh yeah.
Areas, and they'll bring in like 100-man shearing crew and all be trimming. That's like a dream of mine to go see that. That would be really
I would love
fun.
to see that.
But,
love to see that.
And then of course the Basque region in Spain would be spectacular as well. And Spain and France.
I'd like to see that. I'd like to see some of the South African production systems too. I think that would be an interesting place to visit.
Yeah,
for lots of reasons.
The Chinese and Mongolian sheep production would be pretty fascinating too, because China's the #1 producer of sheep. They consume it all locally, but that'd be an interesting culture shock, because it would be so different. You know
what's really fascinating though. I have a friend in Calaveras County, where I grew up, who got to go to Mongolia, maybe 20 years ago. And his family's always trailed cattle up into the High Sierra, and he lived in a cow camp all summer as a kid, and did a lot of that, kind of what we think of as traditional Western U.S. ranching. And he said on his whole trip to China, the place he felt the most at home was staying with herders out in Mongolia and eating mutton around the campfire. He said that felt like cow camp to him.
Yeah.
I think there's a common thread in that kind of rangeland type livestock production that I really enjoy.
Yeah, to me that's one of the special things about the industry. And it's the livestock industry in general, but the sheep, because of the herding, and they're the cow industry to a point too, but really the sheep industry, the way the herding goes and just what it is, but that seems to be transcendent among all cultures. Like if you herd sheep and understand sheep, there's a connection and an understanding between people almost anywhere in the world. And I've always found that fascinating and just something really cool. When I went to Australia the first time, that was one of the things that surprised me the most growing up as American. And I'd traveled to different places before, but how similar their issues were, and how, I mean, it was the same attitudes and the same principles that drove my family are the same ones that are driving these Australian farmers and these New Zealand farmers. And, it's just, it's a, when you assist in the creation from the land, there's just something there that the rest of societies don't get to experience.
Martin Etchemendy said something similar to me last year. He said, we all speak different languages, all of us sheep herders, but we all understand one another.
Yeah, that's true.
That's very true.
Yeah.
So next week we have a guest host. Is that right?
Yeah, we got a guest host coming on. It's going to be Joe Fisher from Bruin Ranch. He's actually a cattle producer, but has some ties to the sheep. But really what we're going to talk about is raising kids in the sheep industry, and raising family, and the lifestyle of ranching. So I'm looking forward to it. It should be pretty fun. So,
well, I'll tune in from the road, and I'll see you back here in about 2 weeks, huh?
Perfect. Give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Help us out a little bit.
I will. Absolutely.
All right. Well, right on. Well, thanks again, Dan. Appreciate the time and the questions, and look forward to next time.
I do too. As always, I learned a lot. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Dan. Take care.
Have a good week.
You too.